All right, let's get right into it. When I say the word supply chain, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably trucks, big warehouses, and maybe a delivery driver at your door. But here's the thing. In the world of manufacturing, that's barely scratching the surface. The reality is so much bigger and way more important. So, on the one hand, you've got that common view, the physical stuff, moving goods from A to B. But on the other hand, you have the industrial reality. Inside a factory, the supply chain isn't just a set of wheels, it's the entire nervous system. It's the brain making all the decisions, sending all the signals, and coordinating absolutely everything. And just like our own nervous system, if it goes down, the whole body shuts down, instantly. We're talking production lines grinding to a halt, no products being shipped out to customers. And maybe worst of all, the cash flow, it just freezes solid.
So, let's pull back the curtain and really dig into what supply chain management means on the factory floor. Forget the textbook definitions for a minute. This is how it actually works in the real world.
Now, you could read this and think, okay, that makes sense, but the real magic is in those last 4 words, without stopping production. That is the golden rule, the #1 priority. SCM is this constant, high-stakes balancing act of getting everything, the material, the amount, the timing, the costs, just right all day, every day, just to keep the factory's heart beating.
So how do they pull this off? Well, a supply chain manager can't just be thinking about boxes on a pallet. They have to be the master of 3 different but totally interconnected flows that are all happening at the exact same time. First up is the one we all get, the physical journey. The material flow. It's that straight line from a supplier into the factory, maybe to a warehouse, and then finally out the door to a customer. Simple enough, right? But that's just one piece of the puzzle.
This is where the real strategy comes in. A great supply chain doesn't just manage the material flow we just saw. It also has to control the flow of information. We're talking forecasts, purchase orders, production schedules, and the flow of money, so payments, credit, and all that working capital. And these 3 are not separate. They are completely tied together.
And this quote just illustrates that connection perfectly. Think about a cable factory, right? A simple 5-day delay on a copper shipment, that's a break in the material flow, and bam, the dominoes start to fall. Production stops. Your workers are standing around, which means you're wasting money on labor, and that big customer order is now late, which means the payment you were counting on this month, well, it's not coming for another 30 days. See? A material problem just became a huge money problem.
So if you're juggling all of this, how do you actually control it? Well, this is where we get to the really crucial difference between just moving things around and actual strategic management. Okay, let's break this down because it's a super important distinction. On the left, you have logistics. Think of this as the tactical stuff, driving the trucks, managing the warehouse, planning the routes. It's the how of getting things from here to there. But on the right, you have supply chain strategy. This is the why, the what, and the when. It's the brain work, choosing the right vendors, planning how much inventory you need, and forecasting future demand.
I absolutely love this analogy. It just makes it so crystal clear. Logistics is the truck. And yeah, it's essential to actually move anything. But the supply chain, that's the brain. It's the intelligence that's deciding if that truck should even be moving in the first place.
And one of the biggest jobs for that brain is what I like to call the inventory balancing act. It is a constant tightrope walk. You have too little stuff on hand, and boom, the factory stops and you're losing sales. But if you have too much stuff, you've just got piles of cash, your working capital, sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Let's jump back to our cable factory for a sec. If they're using 10 tons of copper every single day, and it takes their suppliers 7 days to get them a new shipment, what's the absolute bare minimum they need to have on hand at all times? Yep, 70 tons. It's simple math. But if you get that math wrong, your whole operation grinds to a halt. Order way too much, and you've got millions of dollars just tied up. So to manage this delicate dance, supply chain pros have these really specific tools. They calculate something called safety stock, which is a buffer for unexpected delays. They set a precise reorder level that automatically triggers a new purchase, and they figure out the economic order quantity, or EOQ, to find that sweet spot for the most cost-effective amount to buy at once. These are the levers they're pulling all day long. And you know what? It's the exact same balancing act when it comes to forecasting demand. If you predict you're going to sell more than you actually do, your warehouse gets stuffed with products nobody's buying, and your cash is trapped. But if you underforecast, you run out of stock, and your customers will just go straight to your competitor. Either mistake is incredibly expensive. Now,
Here's where things get really crazy. When you get these forecasts and orders just a little bit wrong, those small errors don't stay small. Oh no, they can get amplified as they move up the supply chain, creating this massive, dangerous phenomenon called the Bullwhip Effect.
So it all starts with something that seems totally insignificant. Let's just say that actual customer demand way at the end of the chain goes up by a tiny 10%, just a little ripple in the water.
Well, the distributor sees that 10% bump and thinks, whoa, demand is picking up. I better order a little extra just to be safe. So to build up a small buffer, they increase their order to the factory by 20%. The ripple just got bigger.
Now the factory gets that 20% order increase, and they start to panic a little bit. They're thinking, wow, demand is really taking off. We got to ramp up production big time. So to be safe, they increase their output by 30%.
And finally, the factory's raw material supplier sees this massive 30% jump in orders and thinks, holy cow, so they place orders for 40% more raw materials just to keep up. So think about that. A tiny 10% change in what customers were actually buying created a massive 40% distortion at the very beginning of the chain. That's the bullwhip cracking.
So how in the world do you tame this beast? Well, the solution is surprisingly simple, at least in concept. Information. By sharing real-time sales data with everyone in the chain, everybody can see the actual 10% customer demand, not the crazy distorted orders. This lets everyone work together on better forecasts and leads to much more stable ordering. Communication is what tames the bullwhip.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. When you can control your inventory, when you can tame the bullwhip, and when you can seamlessly manage all three of those flows, materials, information, and money, the supply chain stops being just a cost of doing business and transforms into a powerful profit driver.
I mean, this chart really says it all, doesn't it? A poor supply chain is just constantly bleeding money. You're paying for last-minute emergency air freight, penalties for delivering late, and tons of overtime. But a strong supply chain, it actively makes you money through on-time deliveries, lower costs, and a steady, predictable cash flow.
And the reason it's so powerful is because the supply chain is the connective tissue of the entire company. It forces everyone to be on the same page. Sales has to give a good forecast. Purchasing has to keep vendors on a tight leash. Production needs to stick to the schedule, and finance has to watch the cash. Supply chain management is the system that links them all together.
So all of this really boils down to one final crucial question. A business with a weak supply chain is constantly in reactive mode, just putting out fires day after day. But a business with a strong supply chain becomes predictable, and a predictable business is a profitable business. So you have to ask yourself, which one is yours?